going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Kings Court podcast with me, Vincent Miracle, here for Fansided.com, GoldenGateSports.com, and of course, SatKingsNation.com. Joining me today, special guest. We've had him on the show plenty of times. Reviewed the Kings season last year. Cowbell Kingdom's James Ham. James, how's it going?
Pretty good. What's going on, Vince? How are you?
Not too bad. Had Dutch Bros this morning, so I'm feeling kind of awake now. I don't know if you've tried that yet, but recommend it.
Yeah.
So, King season's over. Again, another season, kind of like a disappointing season. A big roller coaster ride. And last year when we reviewed the Kings and we were giving out our grades, you kind of said, you have to give this year an incomplete because you can't really grade it because you had a transitional phase. Kings were coming in on a high of keeping the team in Sacramento. Coach Malone had a complete roster changes with Grievous Vasquez now out, and then you're bringing in Isaiah Thomas, and there was so much changes going around on the team. Coming into this year, what would you grade the team on this complete roller coaster ride, going through 3 coaches and everything like that?
Well, I don't like giving standard grades typically. I don't usually write standard grades, but I got to be honest, if I were to grade this season, it would be an F. This was an absolute disaster of the season. And the strange thing is they still won 29 games. They beat their total that they've, 2 years in a row, they had won 28 games. They haven't won 29 games in 6 seasons. So it kind of shows you that this roster was substantially better than they actually played, because they had so much change, so much chaos, just erratic things going on with the organization. The reason I grade them an F is because this season was completely avoidable, what happened in this season. And this was a season you were supposed to be building, being right on the cusp of the playoffs. Next season, you want to be in the playoffs. So the following season, when you move into your new building, you're actually, ready to roll, and you're actually a solid playoff team by that point. That's sort of the design that you want to follow. And to fire Michael Malone 24 games into the season was, I just, there's no other way to say it, but it was moronic. It didn't make any sense. It still doesn't make any sense. And, I had someone ask me the other day on Twitter, would you prefer that, the Kings had Malone and finished the season with Malone and didn't have their 6th pick, or if they had George Karl and the 6th pick? And I have to say that I would prefer Malone finish the season, build towards something. If it's George Karl's time at that point, that's okay. At least you're not encumbered by the fact that you can't trade your 1st-round pick still for a couple of years. Who cares? It goes away. You add talent in different ways, not through the draft this time, which hasn't really worked for the Kings anyways. And I think Michael Malone was a good coach to build around. But even if you weren't going to build around him, and now we see Scotty Brooks is available. He's from, I think, Manteca. He's a local guy. He was an assistant with Sacramento. I mean, I'm not saying that I would prefer him to George Karl. What I am saying is that I would have preferred to build this season. And you look at the Utah Jazz, what they did this season with half of their team being D-League players, and they're still, pushing for 40 wins, really close there. The Kings should have been right there. They probably should have been a little bit better than that from what we see. Again, 29 games. And if you consider that Darren Collison missed 37 games, and DeMarcus Cousins missed, 23 games. Rudy Gay missed 14 games. You have all these games missed, plus you have that debacle with Tyrone Corbin where it lasts, you go 7 and 21 over a 28-game stretch. It just really, it plays into this shoulda, coulda, woulda season that was, all of it was completely avoidable except for the viral meningitis. I'd say that's the one thing that was avoidable. Everything else this season, it just turns out to be like a mess, and it's a mess of their own doing. And, you got to put blame where blame belongs.
Yeah, and I'm saying that you got to put blame on the front office. I wrote a piece about it just the other day on SatKingsNation.com. But my question to you is, they went through these 3 coaches. Now, when they fired Malone, I mean, you came on the show, you said, I mean, that was kind of going to be expected because there was rumblings around that they were kind of clashing or whatever, both Malone and the front office. They were just kind of not seeing eye to eye, mainly that pace that they really wanted. So they moved on to Ty Corbin. Do you think they should have probably just stay with Ty Corbin? Just because I don't think George Karl was going to ever, fully sign on with the team until this offseason. Now, they would have had options because you don't know what's going to happen with Tom Thibodeau. Scotty Brooks just got fired, and now you have George Karl.
Your question was, should they have just ridden the season out with Tyrone Corbin instead of bringing George Karl in? And my answer to that is no. Realistically, what they should have done is they should have never given Tyrone Corbin a contract for the remainder of the season. They should have left him as an interim coach, which would have allowed them to reduce him back down to an assistant coach down the road and not had to pay out his contract in full, which is what they ended up doing. I don't know if it was $1 million or if it was $1.5 million or $2 million. I'm not quite sure what it was, but whatever it was, they paid him when they didn't have to, which was, again, a mark of an inexperienced front office not knowing what they were doing. They should have just left him the interim tag on him. In my opinion, you knew that George Karl wanted this job. You knew that you wanted George Karl. If you're going to let go of Michael Malone on December 14th, then maybe give Tyrone Corbin like 3 days, 3 games as like a breather for George Karl, but then bring George Karl in then. I mean, that was the softest point of the Kings schedule. They had, 15 games in the month of December, and I think 13 of them were at home. Mostly against weak Eastern Conference opponents, and the 3 road games were, I think there was a Knicks game at the end of the month. There was one Warriors game that you're going to lose, and one game against the Lakers, something like that. Your travel was minimal. This was a point where you were supposed to build. Even with DeMarcus Cousins going down, the Kings were just 2 games under 500 under Malone. They easily could have rebounded. I had them coming out of December before Cousins got sick and going into the month of December. I had the Kings at over 20 wins coming out of the month of December. That's how light the schedule was. The first week and a half of January, again, an incredibly weak schedule. It was East Coast. It was on the road, but I mean, just horrible. One game after another of bad teams. And the Kings really, they failed right there. That is where they failed this entire season. I mean, if you take out that 28 game stretch there, and you have either Malone or George Karl's record during that stint, you pick up a couple more wins, especially Malone. Probably getting Cousins back would have been able to rebound, would have had this team back over 500 by the end of December, even with the illness. And we would have seen what this team could do. But, it's not what happened. The coulda, shoulda, wouldas are going to haunt this team. Hopefully this is something that never happens again. But my opinion, they should have just hired, if they were going to fire Michael Malone, option 1, you don't fire Michael Malone. Option 2, you give Tyrone Corbin like 3 days as a cooling off period, and then bring in George Karl and let him go and let him run this team the rest of the year. Karl is a guy who has had a long history of turning teams around instantly. And by the time he got this team at the All-Star break, it was broken completely. And that is all 100% on the management group of this team. And, for that matter, ownership signed off on firing Malone. And, you have to that's where the blame really hits in this season, is that you let the team give up. These players went on strike in the middle of the season under Tyrone Corbin. And you can't have that. And it's an issue of their own making. Completely their fault.
So I do want to jump on the court a little bit, because the season, when it started, it had so much promise with Malone. So, I mean, what did you see going? You were at every home game. You did your road reaction post-game shows. I watch all your reviews to everything. Is there anything that you saw, even when the Kings were hitting their stride, and then kind of under George Karl, the biggest change that you saw between the 2 coaching differences, 1, and then 2, some positive and negatives that they really have to address going into the offseason and going into next season?
Under Michael Malone, I'll be honest, it wasn't exciting basketball. I mean, I've compared that team many times to like a 1993 New York Knicks team that just grinds it out and beats you up and goes to the free throw line and slows the game down. They made their name on defense. Jason Thompson and DeMarcus Cousins playing really solid post defense. Darren Collison doing some things that I don't think anyone thought he could do as far as a defender. Really initiated the defense early in the sets. Ben McLemore was staying in front of his man, still not playing passing lanes, but that was by design. George Karl, and that's one of the biggest differences between George Karl and Michael Malone. Michael Malone plays a very conservative defense as far as steals and block shots. He doesn't believe in overcommitting. Where George Karl, his defensive scheme really mirrors his offensive scheme. It's supposed to be like sort of from the seat of your pants, flying around doing whatever you can do to disrupt passing lanes and to get steals and fast breaks. That is really a George Karl staple. He loves shot blockers who fly in out of nowhere. These two guys couldn't be more diametrically opposed. I mean, if you were to take two coaches, there aren't two coaches that are different, as much different as Malone and Karl. And Corbin, he tried to fit into the middle, and that just never works either. More of an offensive-minded coach who wanted to push the pace. Now, at the end of the day, like I think we now know, just throw pace out the door. Pace was an excuse. It was a bad excuse. You didn't like the style of play. I get it. But this was more about interpersonal relationships and the fact that Pete D'Alessandro and Michael Malone had not had legitimate conversations going on weeks. Malone is old school. He believes that he should be coaching a team that he coaches the players that you give him, and he's not going to tell you how to do your job, and you're not going to tell him how to do his job. And that was really a struggle, that these guys really butted heads. And don't believe this kumbaya, I respect him, and I really think he's a good guy, and it just didn't work out stuff. It became really contentious here towards the end in December. But at the same time, Michael Malone was completely caught off guard by that whole situation. That had, really nothing. He didn't think it had reached that point. He just thought that they were going to have to coexist in a different way. And he was willing to do that and was really, really surprised. Now, were we surprised? I think we were shocked when it happened, but not surprised. We were shocked it happened when it happened, but the rumblings had been going on for a while that, and again, I don't buy this whole, you can't have a coach first and then a GM. I think that's just ridiculous. I think it's stupid. I mean, the Kings did it again, right? They brought in Vlade Divac, and they brought in George Karl first. So once again, they did the same exact thing, but we're talking about weeks. You should be able to work with any coach, and you should be able to work with any front office as long as they're supplying the support that you need. And Malone didn't think he was getting the support he needed at certain times, but during the time that he was let go, the only thing he could point to was like, look, we were rolling, and my best player, who no one else has been able to deal with, is playing at not just an all-star, but an MVP level. And he goes down with an illness and, misses 9 games in a row for Malone, and you let me go. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense. You're never going to have like a good feeling in your mouth, good taste in your mouth with this situation. And to be honest with you, George Karl was really, really wanted this job. He was really, really hot for this job. But if you would have done the same thing and rode out the season with Tyrone Corbin, players would have rebelled even further. You would have had trade demands, which you may still get before this thing is all said and done because of what happened here in this season. But also the way that this season would have played out, I'm not sure that you would have been in the running for any coach. People talk about Tom Thibodeau, and they talk about Scotty Brooks and Billy Donovan, and maybe John Calipari wants to come coach. Well, they're not going to want to come coach in Sacramento, not when it's unstable and outlandish and ridiculous and all the crap that's gone on. No one's going to want to walk into that situation because you're just going to end up soiling your good name, which is exactly what Tyrone Corbin did. I mean, Tyrone Corbin will never be a head coach in this league ever again because of a 28-game stretch with the Sacramento Kings that was really not his fault. His main issue that he had is he said yes. And after that, all bets are off. Once he said yes, I mean, he basically threw his NBA career away. He'll be an assistant again, but that's it. So it's a bad season. It's rough.
Although this was a rough season, Cousins still had an all-star performance. He became an all-star this year. Everyone says, well, it's only because Kobe went out, but he has all-star next to his name. There's no asterisk by it. But there's so much drama going around, especially around that George Karl hire, kind of saying that Cousins, his camp really was up against, hiring George Karl. And then also around the trade rumor, you kind of heard that George Karl really wanted Ty Lawson and that Cousins could possibly in a deal like that. You hear the final game, post-game show with George Karl, and he kind of says, I'm paraphrasing, but I've never had a star that's untradeable. So going into this offseason, after Cousins just had an all-star year, should Kings fans be worried that Cousins really could be on the move this season?
I mean, maybe, but should you really worry about it? I mean, this is one of the tougher quandaries that I've ever seen because DeMarcus Cousins is a very, very talented player, but
and fans love him.
Yeah, well, no, about half the fans love him. You think that the fans love him, but about half of the fans love him. And the other half, have moments where they like him a lot, and they have moments where they're really embarrassed by him. I think to lump everybody in one thing and say everybody loves DeMarcus Cousins is, I don't think DeMarcus Cousins expects that everybody loves him, and I assume that he knows that there are plenty of people that don't like him. He's kind of lived with that for a while. But here's how I look at DeMarcus Cousins. He's been in the league 5 years, and the best season he's had, he still lost 53 games. That's the best. I mean, 54 losses. It just keeps piling up, and I don't put the blame on DeMarcus 100%, but there has to come a point in any young star's career where he has to show the ability to lead his team to victory. And as much as anyone in this season, he got thrown off by the Michael Malone situation. He had a lot of really good games. Statistically speaking, he was a very, very good player. He's probably the best big man in the NBA at this point. I don't like that he shoots 46% from the field. He should be much closer to like 52, 53, 54%. I don't like that he leads the league or finishes second in the league in turnovers. Or that he still has issues fouling out of game after game, or that he picked up, 15 or 16 technicals on the season. Those are bad things still. And not only that, but it's not all, everything is smiles and everything is great behind the scenes either. He still is a guy that, you have to work with. And should Kings fans be concerned? I don't know. I mean, Cousins has to show that he can win, and you're not going to get the Nuggets aren't going to get DeMarcus Cousins for Ty Lawson straight up. I mean, they would do that trade every single day of the week. But we're talking about if they were to make that deal, they'd give up half their roster, and not the crappy half, the good half of their roster. I mean, they would have to give up a ton. And I think basically where we're at with DeMarcus Cousins is that down the stretch, he was shut down, and George Karl didn't want him to be shut down. And so we have some barbs going back and forth. We have some players who maybe didn't want to finish the season out, although Rudy Gay did really want to finish the season out and was not super happy that he was shut down. This is one of those seasons where, agents did get involved a couple of times, and I don't buy the situation between DeMarcus' agent and George Karl and all this stuff. I think that was blown out of proportion really, really largely. And I also believe that in that situation, Pete D'Alessandro's inability to take that situation and squash it damaged his relationship, not just with DeMarcus Cousins, but with the rest of this team. And that is a huge reason why you were hearing rumors that Pete D'Alessandro wouldn't be back. He burned a lot of bridges with his inability to say, look, DeMarcus Cousins has nothing to do with this. We're, just quote David Stern, life is a negotiation. And I'm sure George Karl wanted more than $4 million a year. And that's all he got because that's what the Kings offered. And it was a hardball situation. So when you see all of these things play out, especially in this weird way, there's a reason why DeMarcus Cousins' name was put out there. There's a reason why his name was left out there, so he could be blamed. It was a mistake that should have never happened. DeMarcus Cousins is a temperamental player, a temperamental person, and he, under no circumstance, should have been left hanging in the wind, as this is part of his fault, whether it was or not. I mean, DeMarcus Cousins shows up and plays basketball. That's typically what he does. And, what we saw towards the end of the season, again, with the barbs back and forth with George Karl, that was Karl wanting him to play and Cousins' agent or someone else shutting him down and saying, we're done for the rest of the year. And kind of a weird situation. This season is filled with these little, really these quandaries that you just don't know how they're going to play out long term, because these things do have ripple effects, and we're still seeing some of that.
You brought up the Pete D'Alessandro thing, and I have to bring it up to you because it's still kind of going around. It's either what's going on between the Vlade Divac possibly taking the realms in that front office type of thing? Is Pete D'Alessandro heading to the exit doors, or is it still that reverse backtracking where it's still something about Cousins? Because I mean, I even listened to your show when you brought it up, is with your Cowbell Kingdom podcast show with Aaron Brewski. Basically, it went out that Pete D'Alessandro is possibly making his way out. Vlade Divac might take that kind of GM role. But then it kind of went back around. Well, no, it's like Cousins could possibly be on the move. So so I'm kind of asking you, what's going on with Pete D'Alessandro?
Well, right now it looks like Pete D'Alessandro will be back for next season. I don't think he's going to get a very long leash here, but it seems like he's a guy that George Karl wanted to keep around, and George Karl has a voice in the room. He's one of the voices in the room. Vlade Divac is officially, the leader in the clubhouse there. And the problem that you have with Vlade is he has no experience as an NBA executive. And so he's going to need scouting directors. He's going to need collective bargaining guys who can really work the salary cap. And that's something that Pete D'Alessandro has been good at. Pete even did a lot of good work during the Carmelo Anthony trade. And so you could actually see him,
But wasn't that Masai Ujiri? Or
no,
the GM of...
Well, I mean, yeah, it was Masai, but Pete was the guy who was working the back end of that deal. And so, yeah, I mean, they worked together on that deal, and the final decision on who's getting traded to where, of course, was Masai's. But the guy who was doing the nuts and bolts of the deal from a collective bargaining standpoint was Pete D'Alessandro. So I'm going to say this, Pete has earned himself a reprieve. And I'm not sure how he earned that reprieve. That's yet to come out. But he's not going to be put in front of a camera. He's not going to be making statements or going on the Carmichael Dave show anymore. If he stays with Sacramento, it's going to be in a lesser role. He'll still have his job title from what we know, but he will not be the end-all final decision maker on the Sacramento Kings anymore. Of course, Chris Mullin has already left the building. Vlade Divac will have a huge impact on what happens here. Dean Oliver will probably have a bigger voice in the room. Mike Bratz will still have a voice in the room. But Pete has survived, at least for right now. And this is a crucial offseason. I mean, the Kings have some cap space, not a lot of cap space.
$20 million or something like that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, again, you got to factor in a whole bunch of other things like mid-level exemptions and all this stuff. Yeah, what cap space they actually have is actually pretty dark. It's not like you're going to go out and sign Chris Middleton or steal away. I don't even think they could steal away Danny Green. They're going to have to, or Draymond Green. I mean, they're not going to be players in that market unless they make some dramatic moves. And by dramatic moves, I mean something like buying out Carl Landry and using the stretch provision on Jason Thompson. I think Jason Thompson's still valuable as an NBA player, and he has no interest in being back in Sacramento at all. Carl Landry, on the other hand, will never fit into the George Karl system. He's going to be a waste of $13 million over the next 2 years. I don't think any team is going to take him on because he's running with heavy legs, has no lift left. He's basically an 18-foot jump shooter that can't rebound. He can give you a little bit of toughness in the post as a defender, but he can't play stretch fours. He can't play in space. So, I think the Kings have a lot of decisions to make this offseason, but they're really hampered. And so you got to hit it out of the park with your first round pick, or you got to trade that pick for gold, or you got to figure out a trade to get some of these other bodies around that aren't fitting into the George Karl system and get some fresh blood in here. I don't think you can walk back into next season with this same roster. You need a legitimate 6 or 7 or 8 new players on this roster for next season. And that's the only way you're going to root out some of the negativity that was formed this year. And we'll see if they can do that. And that's really where Pete D'Alessandro sort of will live and die this offseason, which really isn't that fair because he's at the same time, he's not going to be making all the decisions. And we'll have to see how this thing plays out.
So my next question is going to kind of lead into also the draft, but I kind of want to throw out a trade scenario to you. And the trade scenario doesn't mean anything's going to happen, but I have one to you. Let's say you're P or you're the Kings. Would you take the deal of, because there's rumors about Orlando possibly going after John Calipari. Would you ever do a Vucevic and their pick for Cousins?
No, that's
or maybe
not
even
enough.
like throwing Evan Fournier, something like that.
No. I mean, if you're doing that deal, I mean, you're robbing them. You're not. I mean, I wouldn't take Vucevic. I mean, it would be a lot more than that. I mean, it would cost you Victor Oladipo, Aaron Gordon, and your first round pick, and maybe another first round pick on top of that. DeMarcus Cousins is a top 5 player in the NBA, maybe top 8, but I mean, he's right there at the top. And regardless of personality issues and all that stuff, he's still a great player. And those other players that you're talking about, maybe one day have potential to be all-stars, but even young talent like Oladipo, I mean, he's a good player, but he's not a great player. And you're never, I mean, if you're going to trade, a top 5 big man, well, a top 2 big man, I'll even say this, the best big man in the game, if you're going to trade him for
He's better than
anything.
Marcus Gasol.
DeMarcus Cousins?
Yeah.
He kills Marcus Gasol. I mean, Gasol's a solid player, and he's going to get max money, and he's an all-star. But I mean, DeMarcus Cousins has Hall of Fame potential. I mean, Marcus Gasol is a 30-year-old plus center that averages 14 points a game most of his career. I mean, I think if you look at Marcus Gasol, what you look at with him is a guy who sort of has the attributes of Vlade Divac when he was a player. And I mean, the Kings would love to have Marcus Gasol, but you would never have traded Marcus Gasol for Chris Webber. I mean, or Vlade Divac for Chris Webber. Chris Webber was a better player, and that's what you're looking at here. I mean, it's not even in the same. They're not even in the same category, in my opinion. I mean, you're looking at a top 5 player versus a top 25 player, and Gasol's a really good player, but I mean, he's nowhere near the level of talent. And if you're going to get DeMarcus Cousins out of Sacramento, the deal is going to blow away the Kings. I mean, it's going to be a monster deal with multiple picks and all-star level talent going back the other way. It's not going to be for Vucevic and a first-round pick. Orlando, if they were giving up Vucevic and that was all, it would cost them 3 or 4 first-round picks. And even still, I don't think the Kings would do that because they would immediately take a step backwards when they're going into a new arena in 16 months now. So, yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, we're talking like if you dealt with Denver, we're talking Ty Lawson and Kenneth Faried and a first-round pick. We're not talking about
that was my next trade scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it would cost you. I mean, it would cost you that much. And I know Denver had offers on the table to the Kings during last season, but I mean, you're not doing it for less than that, and you're not taking damaged goods. I mean, George Karl would like to have some of his players, but there's some, Ty Lawson has some really, really dark baggage, which is going around the league, and he's going to be very, very difficult to trade. And if the team takes him on, it's going to be because they think they can fix some of the things going off the court with him. But this is going to be something where, I mean, literally the Kings have to be blown away. We're talking about the Carmelo Anthony deal plus, because the difference with the Carmelo Anthony deal was that Carmelo was going to sign some monster contract, but you have to look at DeMarcus Cousins over the next 3 years is so grossly underpaid for what he provides, especially when salary cap blows up. In year 2 of, not this year, but the following year, Cousins would be a $30 million player under the new CBA. He would be a $30 million player the following 2 years under the new CBA. And in those years, he's going to make $16 million and $17 million. So really, you're getting about a $25 to $27 million break on his contract over those years. You have to factor that in. You have to factor in the fact that, he was second in the league in rebounding and 6th in the league in scoring, or 5th in the league, whatever he was in scoring. I mean, we're talking about the elite big man in the game offensively, as a rebounder. He 1.7 blocks a game, 1.2 steals a game. I mean, he's a unique talent that you put in the right situation, he will dominate for years to come, and has potential to be a Hall of Fame player. Where, I mean, again, Gasol, I just don't see Gasol as a Hall of Fame player. And if you're going to give up a Hall of Fame player, you really should get one in return, or a really, really strong all-star level player for a long time, a young all-star level player.
So let's move into the draft, just kind of go through it really, really fast, because I mean the draft is kind of a little bit of ways away, and we're kind of running out of time here. But Kings are projected to get 6. I think there's maybe like the top 8 are kind of filled with like really good players. I'm not completely sold on this draft, really. I think like the top 2, maybe 3, 4, 5 are really where the players are. Are there any like main prospects that you're looking at other than, Jahlil Okafor or what's his name, Wiley Stein or something like that?
Oh, okay. Willie Cauley-Stein. Yeah. Okay. So this is how I would play this. If you land in the top 3, you really look at Russell out of Ohio State. I think he is a next level playmaker, scorer. Can play the 1 or the 2. He's got great court vision, outstanding court vision. I like him to Brandon Roy. That's who I kind of like him to. I think he's got all kinds of potential, and he's a willing teammate. He's got like huge upside. The 2 guys at the top of the draft, Okafor and Towns, I'm not a fan of. The Kings, I think they don't fit next to DeMarcus Cousins. And so to me, that's kind of a big deal. The other player that's up there, I think this is a 4-man draft at the top in tier 1. And the other one is Mondier, the kid who went over and played in China this year instead of going to college. I think he's a very, very good prospect. Plays a little bit like Drew Holiday. I think he's a solid, really, I think he's all-star level potential, but he has a really good game that could translate to the NBA. I think the Kings are going to be, if they're up top, they're going to look at those guys. But there's also a possibility that if they got in the top 3, that they would trade back down to like number 6, pick up more assets, more frontline players, and go after Willie Cauley-Stein, which is who you brought up. I know right now they have sort of like internal discussions are between Willie Cauley-Stein out of Kentucky, who to me, I have some issues with this because he's a shot blocking, rebounding, hustle player, high IQ defensive player, but a ridiculously bad offensive player. Sort of a stronger version of Aaron Gordon without the offensive potential down the road. Maybe a little bit bigger Taj Gibson, again, without the jump shot. So Willie Cauley-Stein is a guy who fits next to DeMarcus Cousins. But I've also heard that the Kings really like one of the foreign-born players, and for the life of me, I don't know his name. He's a 7 foot tall power forward.
It's like Krista something. It starts with a K.
His name starts with Krista Papa something. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really intrigued by him. I don't like that we're hearing all this, oh, Vlade Divac knows the foreign market, oh, blah, blah, blah. If you're getting the young Dirk Nowitzki, that's one thing, but the Kings can't wait for young Dirk Nowitzki to develop and hope that he's not young Andre Bargnani or Sakalidis or Darko or one of these other busted European players who are no good. You can't wait. So do you take a safe bet who's going to fly in and rebound and play defense and block shots and hustle really well and Willie Cauley-Stein, beat everybody down the court as a big man? Or do you go for potential? And I think that's where the Kings have got themselves in trouble before. But now we're in this situation where if you're at 6 and Willie Cauley-Stein is off the board and Russell is off the board, I don't think the Kings draft that spot at all. And if they do, I think they're crazy. I would not take a flyer on a European player, not when you have so much riding on 2 seasons from now. And that might be short-sighted. Again, if you are getting the next Dirk, then, he's a Hall of Fame player. He's a great player. But there's just so much risk in the draft, and Willie Cauley-Stein is a safe bet. Now, I'm going to add one more layer onto this. With the new collective bargaining agreement, with the new salary cap jump, having a young star under contract for 5 years at a really low rate is, in my mind, worth a whole lot more than having a young role player under contract. So a guy like Russell really piques my interest. If the Kings can either move up in the draft via the lottery or move up in the draft with players, moving a Stauskas or moving a McLemore to move up in the draft to get a kid like that, I think you have to consider it, because I think he's a star level player who will be a star level player for, in his second year, he'll be a really good player. Year 3, 4, 5, he'll be super inexpensive while the salary cap goes bananas. And you could have a kid getting underpaid by, $20 million, and his value will be extremely high for the Sacramento Kings. So I don't know. There's a lot of risk in this draft, and there's not a lot of high-end potential, but there are a couple of guys that really stand out to me as good players.
Yeah, I like Willie Cauley-Stein. I'm not a huge fan of him. Just like you said, I think that lack of offense and the type of but I think he'd fit in the tempo just because he does run the floor very, very well. And George Karl is that running type of team. But what we kind of saw between having Omri Caspi or Rudy Gay, whichever one you would consider playing the 4 at times for him, I think they're going to try and go with that lineup a little bit more. I mean, just from watching it, maybe they move Rudy Gay. One player that I really like in the draft that, I really like a lot, and that no one's really thrown his name out there, is Stanley Johnson. I really like him just because he's very defensive. He's very quick, but he doesn't really have a jump shot. That's another. He kind of lacks shooting, but the defense is there. The motor is there. I think he's more of a shooting guard, small forward version of Thomas Robinson.
Yeah, see, and that's not good. That when you're saying Thomas, if you have to say Thomas Robinson, you got to stop there.
I know.
Look, here's the deal, though. I think you can find wings. There are wings that are out there. There are even 3-and-D guys that are out of the league. Dante Jones signed late with the Clippers. I have a tough time believing that Dante Jones wouldn't have helped the Sacramento Kings. A guy who can guard a perimeter player and who can knock down an occasional 3-point shot. I mean, the Kings need that. And he lasted most of the season until he was signed with the Clippers. I'm not quite sure why they didn't bring in a veteran. I know because they had Stauskas, and you want to bring McLemore and Stauskas along slowly. But at some point, if you want to win games, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. The reason I'll bring back the Willie Cauley-Stein idea is not only does he fit next to DeMarcus Cousins as a guy who can guard the 4 and guard the 5, but he also fits when you go to the bench next to Rudy Gay, when Rudy Gay slides over to the 4. And I think that's where you're really going to see. So you could have a rotation where the starting lineup is Cauley-Stein, DeMarcus Cousins, and Rudy Gay. But when you pull Cousins, Gay slides to the 4, Cauley-Stein slides to the 5, and you keep rolling with this group. And I think that that's something that appeals to the Kings, and sort of that way, the versatility appeals to the Kings. And My only issue is that can you find a guy like that out there that someone will trade you for less than a 6 pick? And I think the answer is yes. So I mean, can you get John Henson out of Milwaukee? He's not playing that much. Can you get a different player from a team that might actually? Can you get a Taj Gibson and put Taj Gibson next to DeMarcus Cousins in sort of that same role since he's coming off the bench and kind of buried? You know, I think if you can do that and then at the same time use that 6 pick to get a really really good offensive weapon, you know, or a guy who can do multiple things, who can shoot, who can pass, then that's something I would look at too.
The last name I want to throw at you, just because he's projected around that 4, 5, 6 range, is Justice Winslow. What's your thought on that guy? Just like, you're probably looking at the draft a little bit more now since the Kings are in the lottery. So just kind of your thoughts on Justice Winslow going into the draft. Is he a player that the Kings should be eyeing, let's say, if they get that number 5 pick?
Well, I don't think he's a star. And, you know, I need to watch more tape on him. But at the same time, like we'll get back to what we just talked about. I think Omri Caspi at 26 years old has plenty of time left in him and he's already seasoned. He already knows a role. He already understands what he's doing. And you could probably lock him up for like, I don't know, 3-year, $9 million deal, or you get him for another year at $2 million or a 2-year, $4 million deal, something like that. I think he's going to ask for about $2 to $3 million a year. He may get more than that, but I don't think so. And I think he's better now than Winslow. And over the next 3 to 4 years, he's probably going to be better. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe Winslow jumps up and it's like this incredible, you know, he becomes something that he wasn't in college right away. But I think you're safe for drafting a guy that either fits the system or moving up in the draft to draft a guy like Russell who could be a superstar than you are drafting a guy like that when I think there are cheaper, easier options. By cheaper, I mean they don't cost you the 6th pick in the draft. He might be a really good player down the road, and I might be wrong. But you know, we've seen a lot of wings bust out in this league and really not develop. And you know, he's young, and the Kings are going to have to decide what is their biggest position of need. And you know, they need shooters, they need defensive players. Does he fit into that? Maybe he does. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, so the last one I want to hit on, we got to hit on as quick as possible because I am running that low on time. The point guard position, Darren Collison, Ray McCallum, Andre Miller, and, you know, there's still a little bit of rumblings I'm hearing from, like, different type of people that Rondo, but I still think he's going to the Lakers, and I really don't want the Kings to get him. I just don't think he's worth it. But there's all those rumors going around. What's going to happen with that point guard position? Because Ray McCallum did show promise at the end of the season. Andre Miller wants to come back, but I think he'd rather be on a contender, although he said he wants to be in Sacramento. I mean, I would if I was a veteran. And then Darren Collison just showed what he can do while playing. So what do you think is going to happen there? Do you guys see any major changes?
I do. I think that's a position where you are going to see major changes. I think Ray McCallum played himself into a solid backup role. I think Andre Miller would like to come back and might come back as the third point guard and sort of, you know, player coach type deal with George Karl. He could also go somewhere else, but he would like to play till he's 40. So, you know, he turns 40. I think it's in March of next year. I do see major changes at the point guard position. I don't know if that means that Collison won't be back, but the Kings, if they have Darren Collison as their backup point guard, I think they would be really happy coming into this season. I don't see Rondo signing for what the Kings have, and I don't see the Dallas Mavericks making a move to bring Rondo in. But Rondo is melting down and looks 100 years old out of nowhere and has not fit at all with the Dallas Mavericks. I don't think the Kings will chase him just because I think you have a lot of other options already. But if they can draft, like I keep coming back to Russell, if they can draft Russell, I think him and Collison battle it out. But, you know, in the long run, he'll get there. I could see Collison being dealt. I could see Collison playing a lot of reserve too, because he is really good off the ball, especially in the corner as a 3-point shooter. I could see a lot of different avenues here where the Kings can improve that position. But whether they do or not, I mean, this is going to be a wild offseason, or it could be one of those off seasons where the Kings are just hamstrung and they can't do anything. And a lot of that will be their own making because of what happened this season. I don't know a lot of free agents that are lining up to go to Crazy Town. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the Sacramento Kings were this last year. They were Crazy Town. So at some point you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, how do we make this team better? Can we make this team better instantly, or do we have to wait another year? Or do we start stretch provisioning people, buying out contracts of guys like Carl Landry if you can't move them, and start turning this thing a different way? And I think that there's a lot of potential to twist and turn this roster, and I think they will try to. We'll just see how much they can accomplish.
All right, guys, that is our show. The King Score podcast can be found on YouTube, Spreaker.com. James, where can people find you online?
They can find me at CowbellKingdom.com, where I've been for the last 5 years covering Sacramento Kings. You can find me on Twitter at James_Ham, Ham. And that's pretty much it.
All right, guys. You guys can find me on Twitter at VM Center, covering the Kings for Fansided.com, GoldenGateSports.com, and, of course, SacKingsNation.com. The Kings Score is sponsored by The Quality Shop, located in downtown Roseville, for quality clothes at a quality price. Go to The Quality Shop. Thanks, James, for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. Guys, look for this to be on, iTunes soon and on Spreaker.com. Subscribe there. Subscribe here. Leave your guys' comments in the comment section below. Hit that like button, and until next time, Kings fans, bye-bye.